Hi, welcome to this brief tutorial on how to connect to challenges. This is kind of general. Some of the concepts that will be covered here are applicable to any capture the flag, but in particular here, we are talking about the iCTF, the capture the flag competition sponsored by the Action NSF AI Institute. When you interact with targets, you need to be able to provide input and receive output. This can happen in many different situations. For example, you can launch a program and you want to provide inputs to this program and observe what the outputs are. You can connect to a remote server. The server is running a service, which is again a program, but you want to connect to a remote server at a specific port and interact with that program remotely. And also you might want to connect to a web service. In general, web-based services use the HTTP protocol, and therefore you want to be able to use specific tools to manipulate, for example, certain headers in the HTTP protocol or a cookie or something like that. Here we will focus on Linux systems, but many of the concepts are also applicable to Windows programs and Windows services. But we will focus on Linux and on command line programs. So programs that don't have a graphical interface. These are command line programs only are interacted with only using a terminal. So if you want to do a manual connection, sometimes you want to test if a service is even up and functional. And so you want to be able to connect using a command on the terminal. And one simple way to do this is through Netcat. Netcat is provided in most Linux distribution, and the command is nc. So if you open a terminal and you type nc, the name of the server, in this case, server.acme.com, and the port, 6511, but could be anything between 1 and 65,535, you will open a connection to that service. Then you can type anything you want in the terminal, and whatever you type is sent to this remote service. And whatever the remote service produces is sent back to you. Another interesting thing about Netcat is that if you use the -L option, you can create a Netcat command that listens to that port. And so if you run, for example, the nc-l 6511 on the server.acme.com host, you will see both sides. You will see on the one end, the client sending commands, and you can see the server, and you can use that terminal to send back commands to the client. This in general is useful for debugging remote servers. Of course, this is just to tell you that this tool exists. You can use the manual pages, you can use tutorials on the internet, and you can even ask ChatGPT how to do certain things, and ChatGPT would for sure give you examples on how to do this. So I will not lose any time on this. Another useful tool in Capture the Flags is Pawn Tools. It's a Python library that is devoted to help you out in Capture the Flag competition. And Pawn Tools provides a really huge number of helper services, things that you might not need, like generating shellcode, or things that you might need, for example, the ability to interact with a program or a service. So Pawn Tools require the installation of the Pawn Tool package, but it's a very powerful library that I strongly suggest that you become comfortable with. So in order to install it, you have to create your own Python environment. That's another thing that is a little challenging, especially if you never use Python. A virtual environment is to make sure that all the packages that you install are only for you and not for the whole system. so that whenever you remote that environment, all those packages are removed as well and did not pollute your environment. Once again, I suggest that you ask ChatGPT, what is a virtual environment in Python and what does it mean? And also, of course, Google the same type of question and you can have a lot of tutorials and answers. Once you create an environment, you can activate it. That means that now you are in your particular environment. In this case, it's called MyEnv. And then you write pip install pawn tools, and this will install the pawn tools library, the Python pawn tool library in your environment. Once you have it, you can write a program like this one showed in the slide, where you import from PWN, pawn is the name that you use to import all the functionality. And then you can see that you can call something like process. So you can launch a command, in this case, bin shell. And by calling through the function process, you get back a variable called p that you can use to interact with the program. So when you do p.sendLine, for example, ls pipe grep pi, and you perform the p.receive, you will receive from the output, from the command that you just created, you will receive the output and then you can print it. You can look for particular strings in it. And also, when you're done, you can go and invoke p.interactive and start manually interacting with this target. So this is a way to interact programmatically. So you can write a program that interacts with this local program, in this case, bin shell, but it could be that you received a program that you have to analyze and you don't want to do it manually. You want to do it through a program. So this example is one example of how to interact with a program. And again, when you find yourself in the situation of having to interact with a program, ask ChatGPT and you can ask, I am using pawn tools. I would like to interact with this program locally, and I want to create a script that does this and that. And very likely, ChatGPT will at least provide you with a skeleton of a program that you can use to perform the interactions you need. Of course, pawn tools also provide mechanisms to connect to remote hosts. In this case, instead of calling process, you call remote. And you specify a server name and a port. In this case, the servers is server.foo.com and the port is 1337. At this point, you receive a variable back, p in this case, and you can use this variable, this object, to send messages. For example, you can say, receive until you receive the string username. That means that you will read output from the service until username appears. At this point, the processing will stop and you go to the next line and you can say send line root because you, for example, want to send the root username. And then you say, now wait until you receive the prompt for a password. So the server might send you back a lot of information, but you want to kind of throw it away until you get to the password prompt. And then you send, for example, the password hack the planet. And then you can go in a infinite loop, receiving lines, and printing them out. And this is how you can interact with a service, with receive until, send line, and so on and so forth. If you have to interact with a website, you want to do a little more than Netcat or pawn tools because you want to manipulate the actual HTTP request. And you have two options, and I would say almost three, and I will just highlight the third one because it's a little more complex. But one easy way to observe how the browser interacts with the web service is to use the developer mode of Chrome. If we want to do something a little more aggressive and intrusive, then we want to use a proxy. And a proxy that we will describe later is called burp. and we will see how to install it. So in Chrome, if you select the View, Developer, and Developer Tools, you will see on the side of the Chrome browser a window. And if you select the Network tab, you will be able to see exactly what requests and replies are sent back and forth between your browser and the server, the web server that you are analyzing. And this allows you to see cookies, headers. There is a lot of things that you can expose and analyze. Again, ChatGPT is your friend here. Google is your friend here. Use these tools to get familiar with the developer tools in Chrome. If you want to do something more, there is the concept of a proxy. So imagine that this proxy, in this case, Burp, is the proxy, one of the possible proxy. I'm familiar with it. I think it's a great program, and there is a free version. And it sits between the client and the server. So whenever you initiate a request to the server, the proxy can kind of freeze that request in transit, allow you to, for example, modify it, and then you can send it to the server and observe what comes back. Okay. The Burp website has a lot of training material. It is a little challenging, especially for non-expert to install, but it's a very, very valuable tool to know, because it allows not only to see what goes back and forth between your client and your server, but again, let me repeat this. You can intercept a request from your browser, observe what's in it, modify it, and eventually send it to the server. And this can be very, very useful when you're exploring what can and cannot be done with a browser. So if you want to install Burp, for example, you can start with a clean installation of Kali Linux. Then you want to download their architecture from the community edition website that is listed in this slide. And then you run the installer. Note that, especially on Kali Linux 2024, ARM64, you want to make sure that you have packages like Moozle and Java JDK 17. And on macOS, it's pretty straightforward. You have a DMG file that you can use. So then you simply launch Burp Suite Community. Then if you want to intercept a request, you choose the tab called Proxy. And when you click on Open Browser, it will open a browser that you can use to connect to the service you want to analyze. But if you click on Intercept On, every time you perform a request from the browser, this request will be intercepted in the request window, and you can analyze it, modify it, and then press forward, and the request will actually go to the target. Again, there are plenty of tutorials and other resources on the internet that can show you exactly how to do this. Sometimes you want to go even beyond that. Sometimes you want to have a completely automated interaction with the web. In order to do this, you want to have what sometimes is referred to as a headless browser that you can script. For example, you can write a Python program that say, go to this web page, perform the single sign-on, a complex authentication procedure that is kind of difficult to do using, a very low-level interactive system. So by using something like Selenium, described here, you can actually do this complex interaction and script your interaction with the service. It's an incredibly useful tool. It's used not only for security, but also to do testing of web APIs and web servers. But it requires a little bit of a learning step or a steep learning curve. So I would say Start with Burp Proxy and get familiar with that. And once you get better and better at solving web challenges, one day Selenium could be really what you need and can solve complex issues and complex interaction. Thank you. That is all that I have for now. Remember, these are pointers to various tools, and it would take many hours to cover all the details, but these are starting point. If you know Netcat, if you know Pawn Tools and how Pawn Tools interacts programmatically with a remote server or a local process, you're ready ahead of the game. If you are also familiar on how to use Burp Proxy Community Edition, which is free, all the tools here are free, you will be definitely ready for the iCTF of 2024. Thank you very much and have a good day.